The courthouse erupted in angry whispers when 18-year-old Callum Reeves placed a trembling wedding ring on the finger of 45-year-old Marianne Whitaker. Strangers stared. Reporters raised their phones. Callum's relatives sat frozen with humiliation, while Marianne's face carried the quiet sorrow of someone accepting a punishment she did not deserve. Then, as the judge prepared to sign the marriage certificate, a frail little girl entered the bright courtroom holding a folded letter, and the truth she revealed left nearly everyone in tears. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Stories like this remind our community that appearances can deceive us, love can take many forms, and sometimes the people judged most harshly are carrying sacrifices no one can see. Callum had grown up in the small coastal town of Bellwether, Maine, where everyone knew his family's history. His father, Everett Reeves, owned a successful construction company and had built a reputation as a disciplined businessman who valued pride above tenderness. Callum's mother, Laurel, had died from complications after surgery when Callum was 10, leaving him and his younger sister, Pippa, in a house that quickly became colder than the winters outside. Everett worked longer hours, spoke less, and expected Callum to become a man before he had even learned how to grieve. Marianne entered their lives one rainy spring afternoon, though the rain had ended by the time she arrived. She had been Laurel's closest friend since college and had promised, at Laurel's hospital bedside, that she would watch over the children. Marianne never tried to replace their mother. She simply showed up. She brought groceries when Everett forgot. She sat with Pippa during asthma attacks. She attended school conferences, remembered birthdays, and taught Callum how to drive in an old station wagon that smelled faintly of lavender and coffee. As the years passed, Marianne became the safest person Callum knew. She was a widowed pediatric nurse with no children of her own, and she treated Callum and Pippa with a devotion that never demanded recognition. Yet Everett resented her presence. Every time she helped, he saw proof of his own failure. Every time the children turned to her, he felt replaced. He tolerated Marianne while they were young, but when Callum turned 18, Everett ordered her to stay away. He accused her of interfering with his family and spreading the impression that he was an incapable father. Callum protested, but Everett threatened to cut off his college fund and sell the childhood home if Callum continued defending her. Pippa, only 9, cried for Marianne for weeks. Callum began visiting her secretly during daylight hours, usually stopping by the hospital cafe after her shift or meeting her near the public library where no one from his father's company would notice them. The crisis began when Pippa collapsed during a school field day beneath the bright afternoon sun. Teachers believed it was another asthma episode, but hospital tests revealed something much worse. She had a rare and aggressive bone marrow disorder. Without a transplant, the doctors said she might have less than a year. Everett immediately demanded every possible treatment, but he was not a match. Neither was Callum. The National Registry produced no suitable donor. Marianne quietly requested testing and discovered she was an unusually strong match. She agreed to donate without hesitation, but the medical team uncovered a complication. Marianne had a heart condition that made the donation dangerous. The procedure could save Pippa, but it could also cost Marianne her life. When Everett learned that Marianne was the only available donor, his pride collided with terror. He begged her to proceed, but he refused to apologize for pushing her away. Marianne did not ask him to. Her concern was Pippa. The doctors, however, warned that legal and financial arrangements had to be made because Marianne's condition could deteriorate rapidly after the procedure. She had no living parents, no siblings, and no close relatives. Her late husband had left medical debts that had consumed most of her savings. She owned a modest home and had a life insurance policy, but the policy's beneficiary had died years earlier. Marianne wanted the house and insurance money placed in a trust for Pippa's future care if she did not survive. There was one devastating problem. Marianne had recently been diagnosed with early-stage cognitive impairment caused by reduced blood flow from her heart condition. Although she remained capable of making decisions, an estranged cousin had filed a legal challenge claiming Marianne was mentally unfit and attempting to gain control of her property. The cousin had already convinced a temporary court officer to freeze major changes to Marianne's will until a competency hearing could be held. That hearing might take months, and Pippa did not have months. Marianne's attorney explained that marriage would legally transfer certain protections, medical decision rights, and survivor benefits more quickly than a disputed will. It would also allow a spouse to establish the trust and defend Marianne's treatment choices if she became unconscious. Marianne rejected the idea immediately. She would not marry Callum. She had helped raise him. She loved him as family, and she knew exactly how cruel the town would become. But Callum had already made his decision. To him, the marriage was not romance. It was a legal shield, a promise to protect the woman who had protected him and to save the sister who still slept with a photograph of their mother beside her bed. He understood that people would misunderstand. He knew classmates would mock him, neighbors would gossip, and his father might disown him. None of it mattered compared with Pippa's life. Everett reacted with fury when Callum told him. He called the arrangement shameful and accused Marianne of manipulating a grieving teenager. Callum tried to explain the medical and legal truth, but Everett refused to listen. His fear had turned into anger, and anger was easier for him than admitting how much he needed the woman he had driven away. He threatened to have Marianne arrested. He contacted local reporters and claimed she was exploiting his son. By the following morning, photographs of Marianne and Callum appeared online beneath cruel headlines. People who knew nothing about the transplant called her a predator. Hospital administrators received complaints. Marianne was suspended from patient care while the accusations were reviewed. The humiliation nearly broke her. She sat in her sunlit kitchen with unopened letters scattered across the table and told Callum they should abandon the plan. She believed Pippa could still find another donor. She believed Callum's future should not be destroyed for her sake. Callum knew she was lying to protect him. The registry had already been searched across several countries. Marianne was Pippa's best chance. He reminded her that she had once sat beside him for 6 hours after his mother's funeral because he had been afraid to enter the empty house. He reminded her that she had sold her husband's watch to pay for Pippa's emergency inhaler when Everett's accounts were temporarily frozen during a business dispute. He reminded her that love was not always romantic and sacrifice was not always understood. Some promises looked strange from the outside because the people judging them had never carried their weight. Marianne finally agreed, but only if the marriage ended legally once the trust was secure and Pippa recovered. Callum accepted. They planned a quiet courthouse ceremony with Marianne's attorney and one hospital social worker as witnesses. Somehow Everett learned the date and invited reporters, hoping public pressure would stop them. By noon, the courthouse steps were crowded. People held signs condemning Marianne. Former co-workers avoided her eyes. Callum's friends stood across the street, uncertain whether to support him or protect their own reputations. Everett arrived with Pippa's wheelchair but refused to bring her inside, telling her that Callum was making a terrible mistake. Inside the courtroom, sunlight streamed through tall windows and reflected from the polished floor. Marianne wore a simple blue dress that had belonged to Laurel. Callum wore his high school graduation suit. His hands shook as the judge reviewed the documents. The judge asked whether either person was being forced. Both answered no. The judge asked whether they understood the legal consequences. Both answered yes. The whispers intensified. Someone laughed cruelly. Marianne's eyes filled with tears, not because she regretted helping Pippa, but because the world had turned her greatest act of love into something ugly. Just as the marriage certificate was placed on the desk, the courtroom doors opened. Pippa rolled herself inside, pushing weakly against the wheels while a hospital aide followed behind her. Her pale face was determined. In her lap rested a sealed letter written by Laurel years earlier. Pippa had found it hidden inside a wooden music box Marianne had recently given her. The envelope carried instructions to open it only if the family ever began fighting over Marianne's place in their lives. The judge allowed the letter to be read aloud. Laurel had written it shortly before her final surgery. She described Marianne as the sister life had given her and the person she trusted most with her children. She admitted that Everett was a loving man trapped behind fear and pride. She asked him never to punish Marianne for keeping a promise that he might sometimes be too wounded to fulfill. She wrote that Callum would one day become brave enough to defend people who could not defend themselves, and that Pippa would survive difficult things because she would be surrounded by love. Her final request was simple: when grief made the family suspicious, they should choose gratitude before judgment. The room became silent except for Pippa's uneven breathing. Everett stared at his late wife's handwriting and seemed to age 10 years in a single moment. He finally understood that Marianne had not been trying to replace Laurel. She had been honoring her. The woman he had humiliated publicly was preparing to risk her life for his daughter. The son he had called foolish was doing what Everett himself had been too proud to do, rusting someone completely. Everett walked toward Marianne with tears running openly down his face. For the first time since Laurel's death, he apologized without excuses. He admitted that he had turned grief into control and shame into cruelty. He asked Marianne to forgive him, though he knew he had not earned it. Marianne did not pretend the wounds would disappear. She told him forgiveness would require honesty, responsibility, and time. Still, she reached for his hand. That small gesture changed the atmosphere of the courtroom. The reporters lowered their cameras. Callum's friend stepped inside. Even the judge paused to wipe his eyes. The marriage proceeded, but the judge sealed the private medical details and issued a statement clarifying that the union had been entered for legitimate caregiving, estate, and medical reasons between two consenting adults. Marianne's cousin withdrew the competency challenge after the hospital specialists confirmed that Marianne understood every decision. Everett publicly corrected the lies he had spread, accepted responsibility for the damage, and paid the legal costs without using money as a substitute for repentance. He also asked the hospital to reinstate Marianne and provided documentation supporting her character. 3 days later, beneath clear morning light, Marianne entered the transplant unit. Callum sat beside Pippa while Everett paced near the window. The procedure lasted several hours. Marianne suffered a serious cardiac episode during recovery, and for a terrifying afternoon, doctors feared they might lose her. Callum, now legally authorized to speak for her, followed the treatment plan Marianne had chosen in advance. Everett did not interfere. He trusted his son. Marianne survived. Pippa's body accepted the donated cells slowly, then steadily. Weeks became months. Her strength returned in small victories, standing beside her bed, walking to the hospital garden, climbing 3 steps without assistance, and finally ringing the recovery bell on a bright spring afternoon. Hospital staff gathered around as she pulled the rope. Marianne stood beside her, thinner and physically weaker but smiling with the peaceful pride of someone who had been given a second life alongside the child she saved. The marriage was annulled after the trust and medical protections were secure. There was no scandalous romance, no hidden fortune, and no selfish plan. There had only been an 18-year-old brother refusing to let fear take his sister and a 45-year-old woman willing to be misunderstood in order to keep a promise to a dead friend. Callum postponed college for 1 year and trained as an emergency medical technician. The experience taught him that courage was not loud and that adulthood did not begin with age alone. It began when a person accepted responsibility for someone else's pain. Marianne returned to nursing in a part-time role and later became an advocate for families facing bone marrow disorders. Everett attended grief counseling, repaired his relationship with Callum, and transformed an unused office at his construction company into a foundation that helped families cover transplant expenses. He named it the Whitaker Reeves Fund, honoring both the wife he had lost and the friend he had nearly destroyed. Years later, on a warm afternoon, Pippa graduated from high school. Marianne sat between Everett and Callum in the front row. When Pippa crossed the stage, she paused, pressed her hand to her heart, and looked directly at the 3 people who had saved her in different ways. Everett had finally learned humility. Marianne had proven that love could survive cruelty without becoming bitter. Callum had shown that doing the right thing sometimes meant allowing the world to misunderstand you until the truth was strong enough to speak for itself. Before we reach the end, leave a meaningful comment sharing what this story taught you about judging people before knowing their struggles. Have you ever misunderstood someone's sacrifice, or discovered that an act you once questioned was actually born from love? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. The town remembered the courthouse wedding for years, but eventually people stopped describing it as the day an 18-year-old boy married a 45-year-old woman. They remembered it as the day a frightened family chose truth over gossip, forgiveness over pride, and life over reputation. And whenever Marianne saw Pippa laughing beneath the daylight, healthy and surrounded by people who had finally learned how to love one another, she knew that every cruel headline, every whispered insult, and every tear had been worth enduring.